Welcome back to Kababayan Today. Ako po si G. Tanji. It is National Library Week around the nation, which is why we feature for the next couple of weeks writers who have authored works that have been published who are Filipino American. Starting off with one of my favorites, Carlene Sobrino Bonniver, who grew up in the area now known as historic Filipino town in Los Angeles. Ang nanay niya po ay buntis kay Carlene when they came here to the United States from the Philippines. 2 linggo lang po after they arrived, yung kanyang tatay po ay namatay. And so a week after that, she was born here. And Bonniver grew up in the culture of her mother, but was just as influenced by the highly diverse culture along Temple Street in Los Angeles. Today, Carlene will share with you her work that was first published in Singapore by Times Edition in the mid-90s, which incidentally is now also available on Amazon, called Autobiography of a Stranger. Now, in my hands, I'm holding a lot of other books that Carlene has written, and she joins us here today. Hello and welcome back, Carlene.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
All right, well, it's National Library Week, and we want to encourage people to pick up a book and read. And what better to read work by a Filipino American? We have to support our own artists. That is what you are, and that is why we are going to be reading excerpts of Autobiography of a Stranger. Now, let's just give a bit of context to these people before we start reading.
Okay.
So, context of this book. When did you write it, and what were you trying to say with this book?
Well, it's interesting when I think it's interesting. When I started thinking about writing this book, I had a very different idea of what it was going to be. It was going to be a story about my mother and sister and I, and how we were here alone with no family and no friends.
Here in America.
Here in America, yes. And it turned out not to be that story. I can't say not at all, because part of what I'm going to read today is really a good description of my mother, what she was up against, and how she dealt with things. She had a temper. You know, I don't know Tagalog very well, but it's something like she would go haramentado.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is one time when she did, but it all usually turned out fine. But I kind of enjoyed it, and you know, as a kid would, because I wasn't afraid of it. But so. Talking about that, I have to say the story is not really about my mother. It is about a woman traveling in Southeast Asia, and she takes a lot of risks, and that is one of the things I like to talk to young women about, and that is taking risks, especially Filipinas, whose parents would like them to be safe, as any parent would. And you want your children to have really boring lives, right? Just be safe. And I saw a T-shirt the other day. It said, "Life begins where my comfort zone ends." Now, it doesn't mean you have to leap from, you know, tall buildings or jump off cliffs, but to move out of that comfort zone just enough to give you a bit of a thrill, some new information, learn something about yourself. Don't be so safe that you don't really experience life.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is you've been able to capture your experiences through the pen, and you are sharing them with all of us. We start our reading today with Autobiography of a Stranger, sinulat po ni Carlene Sobrino Bonniver. Let's get started.
All right. The setting is Bunker Hill in the 1940s. My father's sister, Birgitta, is Swedish, and as was my father. And she lives in El Monte, I believe, had a chicken farm. And my mother tried to live with her, but they couldn't get along, of course. So we were living in Bunker Hill. My mother's working in a factory. And the story is based on fact, but I was far too young to remember it, so mostly what my mother told me. There we are in Bunker Hill. My Aunt Birgitta has preceded my mother into the house, and we have cleaned the house, actually as a room, and with a little kitchenette. And my mother walks in the door. Brigida, I didn't know you were here. My mother looked around as she entered the room. She could see it was different. You've been here a long time? No, it only takes a few minutes to make a place look decent, you know. The girls help. They're very willing. She saw my mother looking over at the food cooking on the stove. I brought some groceries with me. There's more in the icebox. Isn't that nice, Mom said as she hugged and kissed Dolores and me. My mother always smelled like nickels in a hot fist. I liked that smell. She said she got it at the factory. She said she got her big muscles in her arms there, too. The rest of her was little compared to Aunt Brigida. Do you always come home so late, Sissy? I'm sorry, I didn't know you were here. I don't mean for me, for the children. My mother apologized some more, explaining that she was working overtime. She stood behind an empty chair at the table, weaving her brown fingers nervously through the cross pieces in the chair back. You can't afford to take care of these kids, can you? There was something in the question that made my mother snap to attention. She looked sharply at my aunt. I will take care of them, don't you worry. But that's just the point. I am worried, very worried indeed. You know that before my brother died, I promised him I'd take care of his children. I told him I didn't care if they were half Oriental, and I don't, Sissy, you know that. I love these kids like I would love my own if I had any. Los Angeles is no place to raise children, especially not in a boarding house. She looked around as though we were sitting in the mouth of a cobra. I've been talking to the children about coming out to El Monte. Dolores could work out there, and Teresa would have a decent place to play. Do you know where I found her today? She was on that wooden stoop out there, 3 stories up. She could have fallen to her death. And do you know where she was before that? With those, I was at Lily in France. Yes, with them. And are they the kind of people you want around your little girls? My mother started to protest, but Aunt Brigida was on a streak, and she didn't stop for a long time. My mother began to weaken. She sat down at the table with us and listened. Her face was getting cloudy. Finally, Mom said something. Brigida, our ways are very different. I still have many ways of the islands. I don't think I can live together with you. It will be like before. My aunt was silent for just a few seconds before she said, I didn't mean for you to come back with them. In an instant, my mother's face went from clouds to lightning. She stood straight up and threw her chair to one side. What do you mean? You are taking my children from me? Oh, no, you are not. You leave my house. With every sentence, my mom got angrier until she screamed, Go now before I kill you! And she lifted the jug of apple juice off the table and crashed it onto the floor. My aunt stood up quickly, grabbed her purse, and headed out the door, yelling, You're wrong, Sissy, to take it this way. I can get those girls through the courts, you know. You're a widow with no education and no skills and no money. You're not even a citizen. You think I don't know that? You son of a bitch! I don't know exactly what the words meant, neither did my mother, but I knew she was swearing. This was going to be good. Son of a bitch, she yelled again as she threw the groceries my aunt had brought back into their paper bags. Then, lightning still upon her face, she ran out the door with them, my sister and I fast behind her. Aunt Brigida had a good start, and my mother had only gone half a block when the groceries slipped from her arms. When she saw them there, poised at the top of a long, steep hill, her face cleared, and she took a few quick steps backwards, her eyes sharp on the groceries. Then she gave a huge cry, pitched to the heavens, full of triumph, and kicked those groceries up into the air, first one bag and then the other. I saw there had been some cheese in there. A long carton of it was going over and over and over, and a little box of sugar went with it, a mate, spilling out onto the black asphalt in a zigzag line of sparkling white. The rest of the groceries either came back down a few feet in front of us and stopped, or else they rolled into the curbs and then into the sewer drains. It was a wonderful show. High drama, a happy ending. My sister and I screamed and applauded and hugged each other. Aunt Brigida didn't wait for the angel's flight. She took to the stairs, leaping down them 2 at a time. I looked over at Mom. She looked like she was crying because her shoulders were shaking and she had tears all over her face, but she was laughing so hard she wasn't making any noise. She had her arms crossed in front of her with her elbows pressed down into her sides. Pretty soon she stopped, came over and picked us up. Her arms were shaking and her heart was pounding. Some of the neighbors had to come out to watch the action. Lily and Fran were on the 4th floor landing. One of them yelled, "Give her hell, sissy!" Mom didn't miss her moment. She raised her voice to the roused theater. "Well, who does she think she is anyway, that son of a beach?"
There you have it. Excerpt readings of Autobiography of a Stranger. We'll be back with Carlene Sobrino Bonniver here on Kababayan Today.